On a quiet Texas street, a woman was attacked on her own front porch by a man pretending to be an HOA officer. Michael Draper had no real authority, just a fake badge, a uniform, and a hunger for control that went unchecked for months. But when he targeted Sarah, her neighbors didn't look away. They stood up. And just wait until you hear how this story turned, and why justice, in the end, didn't ask for permission. It started off like any ordinary weekend, the kind of Saturday where the sunlight feels just right and time slows down a little. Tyler was holding a paintbrush in one hand and a cold iced tea in the other, while Sarah knelt near the porch steps, carefully taping off the edges before applying a fresh coat of white paint. Their dog, Benny, lay in the grass nearby, half asleep, ears occasionally twitching at passing birds. In the distance, someone was mowing their lawn. Another neighbor was washing their car. It was the kind of day where nothing big is supposed to happen. Just home, quiet, and routine. Tyler smiled, wiping sweat from his brow. "You think we'll finish before dinner?" Sarah glanced up and grinned. "If you'd paint as fast as you talk, maybe." Then they heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching over the gravel of their front walk. A man stepped onto their lawn. He was tall, broad-shouldered, mid-40s. His uniform looked almost official. Dark green shirt tucked tight into matching pants, black tactical boots, mirrored sunglasses that hid his eyes, and a polished badge-like patch on his chest that read in block letters, HOA Enforcement. Tyler lowered his brush. The man didn't smile, didn't offer a greeting. He stopped just a few feet from the porch and spoke in a clipped, rehearsed tone. "You're in violation of neighborhood property guidelines. Exterior modifications require prior approval by the HOA board." Sarah looked up, caught off guard by the abruptness. "We're just painting," she said carefully. "It's the same color as before." The man didn't flinch. "Any modification to curb-facing structures must be submitted in writing and approved before action is taken. This is non-compliant work." His voice had that certain edge, the kind that doesn't invite discussion, just compliance. Tyler stepped forward, confused but trying to stay polite. "Sir, with all due respect, we've lived here 5 years. We've never needed a permit to repaint our own porch." The man tilted his head slightly, as if sizing them up. "Things have changed. I suggest you stop now." Sarah stood. She wasn't the kind to escalate things, but this didn't sit right. "This is our property," she said. "We're not breaking anything. And honestly, I don't think you have the authority to—" That's when everything shifted. The man took one step closer, not rushed, but with purpose. His hand moved toward his belt, where a clipped radio sat next to what looked like a plastic case. His entire body posture changed, like he wasn't there to talk anymore. The breeze stilled. The sound of the mower down the street faded. For a second, it felt like time paused. Tyler felt his pulse quicken. Something wasn't right. Not with the uniform, not with the badge, not with the way this man acted like he owned the block. Something was coming, and whatever it was, it had nothing to do with paint. It all happened faster than it made sense. Tyler didn't even see the man move. Not really. One second he was standing at the edge of the porch with that same flat expression, and the next, his arm was outstretched like a switch had been flipped. He grabbed Sarah's wrist with startling precision, and before she could react, he jerked her off balance, pulling her away from the railing. "Hey!" Sarah barely managed a word before the momentum spun her sideways. Her back hit the outer wall of the house, with enough force to rattle the siding. The sound wasn't loud, but it was wrong. It echoed in Tyler's ears like a warning bell. Sarah let out a quiet, breathless yelp. Her shoulder jammed against the wood, paint speckling her shirt where the brush had slipped from her hand and tumbled to the ground. "I'm placing you under temporary detainment," the man said, like he was reading from a script. "Failure to comply with HOA Directive 4.1a regarding exterior alterations constitutes grounds for immediate enforcement action." His voice was cold, flat, official sounding, but hollow, like someone mimicking authority, not exercising it. Sarah blinked, frozen against the wall, her hands half lifted in shock. She wasn't resisting. She couldn't. She hadn't even had time to understand what was happening. "What?" she whispered, breath catching in her throat. "You can't—" Tyler snapped out of it. "Let her go," he said, taking a step forward, jaw tightening. But the man didn't budge. Instead, he reached for his belt. Quick, practiced. From the holster on his side, he unclipped something small and black. It looked like a stun device. Sleek, plastic, functional. The kind of thing that made your brain instantly scream, "Don't get any closer." He didn't raise it. He didn't have to. Tyler stopped. His breath caught in his chest, adrenaline crashing like a wave against his ribs, his arms tensed at his sides, torn, between charging forward and keeping Sarah safe. Sarah's eyes locked with his, wide and stunned. Her mouth opened slightly, like she wanted to speak, to say, "I'm okay," but nothing came out. The man didn't even look at Tyler. His entire focus was on Sarah, like she was some kind of threat that needed handling. His stance was firm, centered, like he was trained, or thought he was. But Tyler saw something deeper behind the mirrored lenses. Not professionalism, not duty, control. This wasn't enforcement. This wasn't about neighborhood rules. This was about dominance, about power for its own sake. And in that moment, Tyler knew. This man wasn't acting under authority. He was pretending, and he'd crossed a line no one should cross. Tyler's pulse thundered in his ears. His mind raced, scanning options, exits, tools. But all he could think about was Sarah, her arm pinned, her expression frozen in disbelief. He felt helpless. But not for long, because even though he didn't know it yet, help was already on the way. The silence cracked like glass. "Hey!" The shout came from across the street, loud, clear, and commanding. Tyler snapped his head toward the voice just in time to see a figure moving quickly across the road. It was Jim Miller. The retired Marine had lived next door for years. Quiet guy, early 50s, known for his early morning jogs and the American flag that never missed a day on his porch. But this wasn't the man Tyler usually waved to on the weekends. Jim was moving with purpose, fast but controlled, wearing a tactical vest over a plain shirt, and slung across his chest, resting firmly in both hands, was a 12-gauge shotgun. Not pointed, not raised, but ready. The moment shifted. Tyler didn't breathe. The man in uniform turned his head slightly, tension twitching in his neck. His hand still gripped the device on his belt, but his posture changed, subtly, like he was recalculating. Assessing risk. Before anyone could speak again, two more figures appeared farther down the street. Tom and Karen Martinez, a married couple in their 40s, teachers, local volunteers, kind, warm people. And now, wide-eyed but firm, Tom had a legally holstered sidearm on his hip, and Karen's hand was resting near hers as well. They weren't yelling, they were watching. All of them were, from windows, from driveways, from porches, neighbors, not panicked, but alert, witnesses, backup. The entire neighborhood seemed to be holding its breath. Jim stopped at the edge of the lawn. His voice was even, steady, like someone used to giving orders under pressure. "Put her down," he said, "right now." There was no threat in his tone, no shouting, but it hit harder than a scream. The man, still gripping Sarah's arm, hesitated. His lips parted, like he was about to argue. But he saw the way Jim stood, how Karen's eyes locked on his every move, how Tom's hand hovered near his hip. And behind them, more neighbors were stepping outside, phones out, eyes narrowed, nobody moving rashly, but everyone present. The illusion of control was collapsing. Slowly, the man released Sarah's arm. She stepped back, shaken but upright, and Tyler caught her instantly. The fake officer's hand twitched near his belt, hovering over that device again. But this time, it wasn't enough. He knew it. Everyone knew it. "I'm just enforcing community policy," he said, voice cracking for the first time. "I have jurisdiction through the HOA security protocol." Karen's reply came sharp but measured, cutting through the tension like a blade. "You're not enforcing anything. You're trespassing, and you're done." It wasn't just a statement. It was a verdict. Tyler looked around, still holding Sarah close, his heart pounding in his chest. The same street he'd seen every day, the same familiar porches, trimmed hedges, and quiet sidewalks, now felt like something else entirely. It wasn't just a street anymore. It was a line, and his neighbors had just drawn it. The moment the sirens reached the edge of the neighborhood, everything shifted again. The fake officer turned his head just slightly, like a man who thought he had the upper hand, and was suddenly unsure. The street, only moments ago tense and hushed, filled with the rising whine of approaching cruisers. Red and blue lights flickered through the leaves. Dogs barked in the distance. Somewhere, a child began crying behind a screen door. Then the police arrived. 3 squad cars pulled up, fast but controlled, tires crunching over the curbside gravel. Their lights painted the sidewalk and porches in flashes, as if the neighborhood itself had been lit up by warning signs. Doors opened. Officers stepped out in pairs, scanning quickly, hands low but ready. One of them immediately spotted Sarah, bruised and unsteady, supported by Tyler's arm. Another looked at the man in the false uniform, still standing on the lawn, still clinging to whatever illusion of authority he thought he had. Before the officers even said a word, he spoke, voice louder now, more desperate, more defensive. "I'm with the HOA," he called out. "This was a legal intervention. They were in violation." He took a step forward. That was a mistake. "Stop right there," one officer commanded, holding out a firm hand. "Turn around slowly." The man hesitated, just for a moment, as if still considering whether he had room to argue. "I have documents," he insisted, pointing at his chest, at the fake patch on his uniform. "This is within regulation. They were repainting structural surfaces without board review. That's non-compliance under local charter. Look it up." His voice was calm on the surface, but it cracked near the edges, like someone who had spent so long pretending that now even he wasn't sure if it was real or not. The lead officer didn't answer. He simply repeated, clearer this time, "Turn around, hands behind your back." And this time, the man obeyed. The sound of cuffs clicking shut should have been satisfying. But for Tyler, it wasn't. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stood beside Sarah, keeping her steady, watching every movement as the man was disarmed and searched. One of the officers removed a plastic stun device from his belt, not standard issue. Another found a clipboard in the man's bag with unofficial violation notices scribbled in pen. All of it looked almost real, just enough to fool someone, until it didn't. As the man was led toward the cruiser, he was still talking, still insisting. "I was just doing what needed to be done. This neighborhood has gotten sloppy. People ignore the rules. No one listens unless someone enforces order." None of the officers responded. They didn't have to. The scene spoke for itself. Sarah didn't say anything either. She leaned into Tyler a little more. Her arm was trembling. Not from panic, but from the aftershock of what had just happened. The kind of shaking that doesn't come from fear alone, but from adrenaline crashing after a moment of real danger. Tyler looked down and saw the swelling starting to bloom near her shoulder. A deep discoloration was forming beneath the skin, a visible reminder of how real it all had been. He clenched his jaw. He wanted to feel relieved, grateful, safe. But what he felt instead was something heavier, hotter, personal, because it wasn't over. Not for him. This man hadn't just crossed the line. He'd created a moment of fear in their home, in her. He'd walked onto their porch, wrapped in a costume of fake power, and acted like he had the right to dictate, detain, intimidate. Who was he? How long had he been doing this? And why did no one stop him until now? Tyler looked around at the flashing lights, the officers collecting evidence, the neighbors still standing silently in their yards, holding phones, watching. Everything felt slower now, hazy. But beneath it all, he felt something awakening in his chest. Not vengeance, but purpose. He wasn't going to let this go, not just for Sarah, for everyone who ever opened their door and thought they were safe, only to be met by someone pretending to wear authority. This wasn't just about one bad man. This was about what happens when the wrong person thinks no one's watching. And Tyler was watching now. The man's name was Michael Draper. It didn't take long for the truth to surface. The officers ran his name through the system the moment he was in custody, and the report came back fast. Too fast. As if the system already knew who he was. Michael Draper had never been affiliated with the HOA, not in Cypress Hill, not in the county, not anywhere. He was no officer, no compliance agent, not even a licensed contractor. In fact, just 3 years earlier, Draper had been fired from a private security firm in another state. The official reason? Use of excessive force during a confrontation at a shopping mall. But the part that stood out most, the part that chilled Tyler to the bone when the officer quietly mentioned it, was this. Draper had impersonated a police officer during that same incident. He had worn a uniform he wasn't authorized to wear, carried equipment he wasn't certified to use, issued threats he had no right to make. The company let him go. The mall pressed charges, but the case was quietly dropped as part of a settlement. No prison, no formal record of impersonation, just a termination and a trail that went cold. Until now. After that, he disappeared from public records for a while. No steady employment, no legal action. But 2 years ago, he moved to Cypress Hill, a quiet, peaceful neighborhood, exactly the kind of place where no one asks too many questions. And over time, he started building a new image. He bought a dark green uniform online, close enough to look real from a distance, but generic enough to avoid legal scrutiny. He stitched a patch to the chest, HOA Enforcement Division, a division that didn't exist. He printed fake violation forms on his home printer, added a laminate-covered badge clipped to his belt, and began patrolling the neighborhood. Not every day, just enough to become a presence, enough for people to start recognizing him. He'd knock on doors, leave notes on fences, warn elderly residents about non-compliance fees. A few neighbors mentioned later that he even suggested they could be reported for leaving trash bins out too long. Most ignored him, thinking he was just an overzealous HOA rep with a bit too much free time, but no one challenged him, not until Sarah. When police searched his belongings, they found the entire setup. A knockoff taser, non-registered. A clipboard with blank violation notices. Forged HOA credentials, printed with logos that mimicked the real thing. And perhaps most disturbingly, a small notebook listing names and addresses of residents, with notes beside them like non-compliant, repeat warning, and even watch after dark. It was all fake, every badge, every title, every rule he quoted, but the bruise on Sarah's arm, that was very real. Tyler sat in silence that evening as the detective walked him through the report. Across the room, Sarah rested on the couch, ice pack over her shoulder, her eyes closed but not asleep. Her body had finally stopped shaking, but the unease hadn't left. How long had Draper been doing this? How many people had he threatened into silence just by wearing the right color shirt and speaking with authority? And what if Tyler hadn't been there? What if someone else had opened the door and no one had been watching? There was no official title next to Draper's name, no badge that could be taken away, no supervisor to report him to. Just a man who decided one day that power could be worn and believed no one would stop him. Until now, the story didn't stay on one street. By the next morning, it had already spread across town. A neighbor's doorbell camera had captured the confrontation, clear enough to see the fake uniform, the aggressive body language, and the moment Draper was surrounded. The footage hit social media, and from there, local news picked it up. The headline read, "Fake HOA enforcer attacks woman. Neighborhood mobilizes." Reporters interviewed residents. Some spoke anonymously, others on camera. It became clear this wasn't an isolated act. Draper had been confronting people for months, pretending to represent authority no one had granted him. The HOA board responded quickly. No affiliation, no approval, no connection. They scheduled an emergency meeting to address resident concerns. And Sarah, she refused to let the meeting happen without her. She arrived with her arm in a sling and quiet determination in her eyes. The community center was packed, dozens of neighbors, HOA officials, even off-duty officers. She stood in front of them all and told the truth. "I was assaulted in front of my home," she said, "because someone wanted control, not safety, not order, control. I don't care what patch he wore or what title he made up. He was a threat." She paused. And he got that far because we all assumed someone else was checking. No one interrupted. No one blinked. In that moment, Sarah didn't just speak for herself. She spoke for every quiet moment when something felt off, and no one said anything. And this time, everyone was listening. The meeting didn't end with applause. It ended with resolve. After Sarah spoke, something shifted. Not just in the room, but in the entire neighborhood. The fear that had quietly crept into their lawns, driveways, and routines began to lose its grip. People weren't just shocked anymore. They were awake. And then they started talking. One by one, hands went up. Residents began sharing their own encounters, small moments that had seemed odd at the time, but now made sense in a much darker light. An elderly man described a folded note left on his door, accusing him of violating visual standards because his mailbox paint was chipped. A young couple recalled Draper standing near their yard, measuring their fence with a metal ruler and warning them that they were at risk of non-compliance. One woman's voice trembled when she said Draper once implied he could report her to child services if she didn't keep her kids inside during quiet hours. No one had believed her then. Now, no one doubted her. The room wasn't angry. It was united. For the first time, people saw each other not as neighbors separated by property lines, but as a single community that had been manipulated in silence. That silence broke that night. The HOA board listened, and to their credit, they acted. They announced a full audit of neighborhood policies, procedures, and communication channels, a review of how complaints were handled, and more than that, they committed to pressing formal charges on behalf of the entire community, not just Sarah. Draper hadn't intimidated one house. He'd infiltrated the trust of the whole block. Outside the community center, people gathered in small groups. Some hugged. Others exchanged contact numbers, promising to stay more connected. There was talk of forming a real safety committee, with real oversight. Tyler stood beside Sarah on the sidewalk, his hand resting gently on hers. The night was calm again, the kind of calm that comes not from routine, but from resolution. Jim Miller approached, quiet as always. Tyler turned to him. "You protected her," he said simply, but Jim shook his head. "No," he said. "We all did. That's what neighbors do." No applause, no banners, just understanding. It wasn't about being heroes. It was about drawing a line and saying, "Not here, not anymore." And this time, everyone was standing on the same side of it. Michael Draper sat in a courtroom that was brighter than anyone expected. No bars, no drama, just polished wood, quiet voices, and the steady tick of a clock that didn't care how serious the charges were. But the charges, Bailey Seriosnia, impersonating a public official, assault, unlawful detainment, illegal possession of a conducted energy device. Each one backed by more than just testimony. There was video. There were written statements. There were neighbors, more than a dozen, who came forward not with rage, but with facts, calm, clear, collected. It turned out Draper had left a trail far longer than anyone imagined. Over 6 months, he had documented dozens of violations, approached homes uninvited, and delivered warnings that carried no legal weight, only the illusion of force. An illusion, as it turned out, could be dangerous. The trial didn't drag. His attorney tried to paint him as misguided, too passionate about neighborhood order. But the evidence didn't waver. The judge didn't either. When the verdict came, it was read with calm finality, guilty on all counts. Then the judge spoke, not to the room, not to the press, to Draper directly. "You didn't just impersonate authority," she said. "You weaponized fear. You used a costume, a badge, and a tone of voice to make people believe they owed you obedience. You used power you never had, to control people who owed you nothing." Her voice was level, not angry, but the words hit harder than any raised voice could. Michael Draper was sentenced to 5 years in state custody with no possibility of parole. There was no outburst, no handcuffs slammed on the table, just the quiet sound of a chair sliding back and an officer gently guiding him away. Justice wasn't loud that day. It didn't need to be, because for the first time in months, the residents of Cypress Hill knew what happened to Sarah wasn't just seen. It was answered, not with noise, not with anger, but with consequences that counted. The porch rails were finally finished. They stood bright against the late afternoon sun, freshly painted, crisp white, exactly the way Sarah had envisioned weeks earlier, before everything changed. It was a small detail, nothing dramatic, but to them, it meant something. It meant normal had come back on their own terms. Sarah sat beside Tyler on the porch steps, her sling finally gone, though her arm still carried the faint yellow traces of healing. She sipped tea slowly, her gaze following the quiet rhythm of the neighborhood. Children coasted down the sidewalk on bikes. Someone a few houses over was planting flowers near their mailbox. A dog barked once, then laid back down under a tree. It felt, for the first time in a long while, like peace had returned. Not just to their home, but to the whole street. There were no more fake uniforms, no more veiled threats, no more pretending. Only people, real people, living their lives again and watching out for each other. A local journalist had called earlier that week, asking if Tyler would speak on record, just a few words for a follow-up story. He'd thought about it, not long, but carefully, and when the time came, he gave a quiet, honest answer. "If I could go back, I would have stepped in sooner," he said. "I would have trusted my gut instead of second-guessing it." Then he looked around the block, the homes, the familiar faces, the community that had shown up, not with cameras, but with conviction. "But what I have learned," he continued, "is that we're not alone out here, and when it counted, the street didn't hesitate. They stood with us. That's what stayed with me." The article ran under the headline, "Cypress Hill Finds Its Voice." Tyler didn't need to read it twice. He already knew the truth. Sometimes justice doesn't come from a courtroom or a badge. Sometimes it starts right here, with a neighbor stepping forward, with someone refusing to stay silent, with a porch rail, finely painted white, standing as a quiet reminder, we take care of our own. And the most powerful kind of protection, it comes not from permission, but from each other.